Good morning, Rabbi Sai. We are here, a tremendous Kiddush Hashem. First of all, today's shir is sponsored by Aaron Hirsch in honor of the yortzeit of my father, Avraham Yitzchak ben Binyamin, whose yortzeit is this Shabbos on Erev Pesach. Wow. The Shoma should have an aliyah. Shkoyach Aaron for being such a big part of the shir. It's amazing to see. I think it's a tremendous Kiddush Hashem. When typically Erev Pesach, it's Erev Shabbos, Erev Pesach, or Erev Pesach, but it's a day where people are scrambling and making charoisas and mara and who knows what, and people come together to learn Torah, and there are a bunch of people that are on now that were on last night. So that means they were up until like about 2 o'clock in the morning, and here they are again for a shir to be mechazik. So unbelievable. Kol hakavod, tremendous Kiddush Hashem. I'm reading this particular email, which I got just recently. It's a newer one, but because I can relate to it, I know Aaron Hirsch can relate to it. He told me he didn't go to sleep yet since last night, since the shir. This is from Ilya Luria. Dear Eli, many people live lives of chaos, lives where every day is up in the air, where nothing is fixed in place. They say one cure for such madness is a regular sleep-wake schedule. Perhaps you simply have a fixed time to go to sleep and a fixed time to wake up. All else can be out of place, but at least you'll have structure. But even sleep for some people is something out of their control. I'm writing this email to you with extremely little sleep because my friend and I are running a growth-oriented Pesach program in Miami for young Jewish professionals. You should have tremendous hatzlacha. It's not an easy thing. I just drove to Miami from New York in 20 hours straight. So that's one thing. He got there in time, but I wonder what the program is going to look like. I guess I'll sleep the entire Shabbos. Only making stops for bathroom and gas. For me, sleep does not determine my structure, but I do have a real anchor, something that keeps my day grounded like nothing else. The daf. Thanks to you, Eli, my day revolves around the daf. Forever grateful, Eliyahu Luria from Flatbush, Yishkoyach. A few of us can relate to this non-sleep business. Erev Pesach. Like I said yesterday, I don't know if you were on, this presents to me probably one of the greatest challenges that I had in giving the daf, because it's a 3-day yontif, and that means that I have to give 2 daf yesterday, 2 daf today, and we're dealing with Masechtes Shekalim, which is not very easy, and on top of that, there's a bunch of other stuff that have to be taken care of, and I have to drive to the hotel. I just found out, I told my wife I might have to walk the final stretch, but then I found out that Shkia is after 7 o'clock, so I'm relaxed. After the shir is over, we're going to cut, then I have to prepare a whole new daf. So luckily, if you look at this shkalim, basically, they did a very good job on being misader the dapim. It's structured very nicely, starts the sugyas in the top, and here we go, a brand new sugya, brand new Mishnah, Halacha Gimel, Mishnah. The official Mishnah sponsored by Fischl from Official Catering from Baltimore. Says the Mishnah, Daf Vav Amud Aleph on top. Hamachanes moed v'amar harei l'shikli. Person is gathering money, doesn't have a lot of money, so he puts aside a penny here, 5 cents there, a nickel, a dime, and he says these words. This should be for my machzah shekel. Beishamai oimrim moisaron nedava. He went overboard. One day he counted. He realized he has more than a half a shekel. Now what? So Beishamai hold of the concept hegdish tos is hegdish. I made a mistake in hegdish, so what do I do with the extra? Obviously, I cannot bring it as a machzah shekel. Why not? Well, that's a mefurish pasuk that you don't bring. No one could bring more than they're allowed. Momo again is not muted for whatever reason. So you cannot bring it as a machzah shekel, because if Klal Yisrael brings now we discussed this yesterday and we'll talk about it a little bit more today. If all of Klal Yisrael together decide that they're going to bring more than a machzah shekel, it's going to be another amount, great. But if the machzah shekel is a half a selah, and you bring 3/4 of a selah, that's a no-no. So what do? Maisaran nidava. This is we have this many times in Shas. Nidava over here is talking about Kates HaMizbeach. Kates HaMizbeach is the dessert of Mizbeach, meaning when the Mizbeach is slow, there's not a lot of business going on, not a lot of korbanos, so they grab an oila from the Ketz Mizbeach and they throw it on. Nidava. So it's a communal nidava. Your extra money that you put aside by mistake, I don't hold, says Beis Hillel, of hegdish tos. Hegdish tos is not hegdish, and therefore whatever I put extra doesn't have any kedusha to it at all. You could put it in your pocket and do whatever you want with it. If a person says the lashon sha'avi mehem shikli, I am going to bring from this money my machzah shekel, shavin sha'amoiser chulin. Everybody agrees that in this case it's chulin. If you say elu shikli, this money, okay, I could have a machlekes. But if you say I'm going to bring from this pile, it's not all hakodesh. Everybody agrees that the leftover is chulin. Elu lechatasi, same exact case, but now I'm talking about a carbon chatos. Somebody was over in Aveira, he was mechal Shabbos by mistake, so he has to bring a carbon chatos. So he says, I'm going to bring from this my chatos. Everybody agrees that the leftover of the money is chulin because he said, I'm going to bring from this pile of chatos. Omar Reb Shimon, ma ben shkolim lechatos, but what is the difference if he says a chatos or shekel? What is the difference? Elo yesh shel shkolim yeshlim kitzva, ulechatos ein lo kitzva. Very simple. When it comes to a machzah shekel, there's a certain amount. But a chatos, we don't know how much he wants and how much he doesn't want. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, avl shkolim ein lem kitzva. What are you talking about? A machzah shekel also doesn't have a certain amount. Shekisha'ali Yisrael min hagoyla hayu shoyklim dar koinos. So yesterday we had the lashon dar koinos. It's the golden. Basically, it's more than what we do today. I saw a pshat. I forgot who. One of these people on the side says that in those days there were less Jews. They needed to raise more money, so the value was higher. So it was worth 2 shekel per person, let's say. Chazru lishkol slime. Later on, they went down to a sela, and you bring a half of that. Chazru lishkol tevaim. Tevaim, a teva is a half a sela, so they would bring the whole thing. Now, bikshu lishkol dinarim. So then they said, well, maybe you should bring half of a sela because you're supposed to bring a half of something. In other words, the idea was that whatever your currency is, so if your currency, you live in America, your currency is $1, you bring a half a dollar. That's why you see like Purim in the pushka over there, $50, because it's an Indian to bring half of the currency. However, the trick is it always has to be worth more than the original half a currency, whatever they brought in the time of Moshe Rabbeinu. You don't say, I do a shekel, and a shekel is only worth what, a third of a dollar today, a little more maybe, so I'll bring you half a shekel. No, that doesn't work because that's worthless. It has to be more than what it was in the time of Moshe Rabbeinu, but nevertheless you go with the half a currency. So they try to do this trick and take a half of a teva, which a teva, we said, is worth a half a shekel, a machzah shekel. And they wanted to go a quarter, like a half of that, which is a quarter of a machzah shekel, a quarter of a shekel. Bikshu lishkol dinarim v'leikim man. They weren't happy with that. Omer Reb Shimon, aval pikein yad kulam shava, aval chatos ze mevi b'sela, v'ze mevi b'shtayim, v'ze mevi b'shalosh. All right. So when at the end of the day, everybody is equal when it comes to a machzah shekel, but when it comes to a chatos, some people could bring a larger animal, a better animal, and it'll have all different amounts. But when it comes to what the Mishnah is trying to say here is that when it comes to machzah shekel, yes, you're showing me that in history there were different values. So let's say at one point in the history it was $10, and today the machzah shekel is $5. But all of Klai Yisrael is going to bring the exact amount. So everybody's going to bring a $5 bill today, or a half a shekel, whatever it's worth. Yes, it's different value, but it's the same for everybody. So you can't tell me that when I put money aside, I meant more, because I can't bring more. I have to be exactly like everybody else. Whereas a carbon chatos, there's no limit. So one guy could bring $1,000 carbon, the next guy could bring a $2,000 carbon. Says the Gemara, Hamechanes. Rabbi Yosi b'Shem Reb Lazar. So here we have a machloikis in what Reb Lazar said. We call him Reb Lazar with the Aleph. The Yerushalmi calls him Reb Lazar. Sometimes it switches back to with the Aleph. Mapal Ginim. What is the machloikis between Bisham and Bisil? B'mechanes proitreit. A guy is collecting money for his maksas shekel nebach. He doesn't have a lot of money, so he keeps on putting aside a dime at a time. But if a guy takes a whole handful of money, says, whatever is in here, I want to bring my shekel. He grabbed the whole handful and he says, from here is my shekel. Obviously, he knows he's not making a mistake. He knows exactly what he's talking about. So when he said that this is my shekel, everything becomes an adava. He doesn't have a way out of it. But when he's putting money on the side, then perhaps I'll say, according to Beis Hillel, that he made a mistake, and if he made a mistake, only what he needs, what is necessary for the machzah shekel, that's what becomes kadosh. Reb Chia b'Shem Reb Lazar. Oh, so here you have other Talmidim saying also in the name of Reb Lazar. Mapal Ginon, what's the machlokes? B'mechanes proitreit. And Mamish, the exact opposite they hold of what we just said. Talmidim, same Rebbe, but the opposite outcome. If a person says specifically, this should be my shekel, it goes to chulin. Or Reb Chia, we have a raya from the Mishnah like Rabbi that says that whatever's left over, if he took a whole handful and he said, this is my shekel, whatever's left over goes to chulin, not to hagdish. It's not a number of Shimon. Our Mishnah. What is the difference between a shekel and a chatos? A shekel has a determined amount, a chatos does not. What is it talking about? How do you make the connection between a chatas and a shekel? What's the case? If he says that lashon, I'm going to bring from this my shekel, then they're both equal. There's no difference between a shekel and a chatas. Everybody's going to agree. Whatever's left over is chulin. If I say I'm going to bring from that my chatas, everybody agrees that the leftover is chulin. So what's the difference? So a person says this money is for my half a shekel. Since a machzah shekel is very determined and it's exact, the Torah says it has to be half a shekel. So whatever's left over is chulin because the Torah already told me how much it is. So when I said this should be for my shekel, I can't bring more. Since the chatas doesn't have any limit, so that would seem like Rabbi Bivi. That what? What's his name? Forgot his name. Baby, yeah. That the extra becomes chulin. That's it says mufurish over here that by a machzah shekel, whatever you have extra doesn't become hegdesh, it becomes chulin. You can use it as you wish. Says the Gemara, if that's the case, my avodas, Rabbi Yosi b'Shem Reb Lazar, the first Talmud that said in the name of his Rebbe Reb Lazar that if the extra becomes hakodesh, what is he? How is he going to explain our Mishnah? Pasar law, he's going to answer b'mechanes proitreit. It's not talking about that he grabbed a bunch of money and said this should be my half a shekel. Rather, it's talking about that the guy is collecting slowly. He puts aside 10 cents, 10 cents. Uke Beis Hillel. He's not going according to all shitas, Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel. He's talking about in Beis Hillel. That's the halacha. V'taninon moisar shkalim chulin l'chayra. This goes according to everybody. No. Pasalav b'mechanes proitreit Beis Hillel. A little bit of a stretch, but we're going to say it doesn't go according to anybody. Everybody. It goes only according to Beis Hillel. Skip 2 lines, as we like to do in Shkalim. Hamaver shikloi. Case. A person sets aside his half a shekel, right? We call it shekel, but we mean a half a shekel. Either it's worth a shekel, it's a half a shekel, it's worth a shekel, whatever. But we call it a shekel, we mean a half a shekel. So he set it aside. He thought that he didn't bring a half a shekel. It turns out he did, whatever the case was. His wife brought it in for him, whatever it was. loy kadash. He made a mistake, an honest mistake. So the kedusha is not chal. It doesn't grab on the kedusha. But here's another case. Similar case, but very, very different. He set aside 2. Let's say he thought that he forgot to bring last year, and he also thought he didn't bring this year. It turns out that he forgot. Amnesia, he didn't bring last year. So 1 out of the 2, he's chayiv. So you hear the chap here? Since 1 out of the 2 is chayiv, so the kedusha is chal on part of what he said. So once the kedusha is chal on part of what he said, maybe perhaps it should be chal on everything. You see, if the kedusha is not chal at all, he made a complete mistake. So take the money and put it in your pocket. It never started, but once the kedusha starts, it has where to grab onto. Maybe it spreads to the other shekel, the half a shekel as well. We can learn from here. What about a different case? I'll prove it from the case of a chatos. What happened? A guy set aside a chatos. He thought that he was Michal Shabbos. He finds out he wasn't. Or he finds out that he gave a chatos. Whatever the case is. It turns out he's never chayiv this chatos. Loy kacha. Same exact case as we said by machzah shekel. You did it by mistake. You mafresh it by mistake. Not hakodesh. Same thing by a chatos. And what if a person designated 2 korban chatois, and he finds out that he's only chayiv 1? Oisa shniya roya. So he skipped 5 words. Stick in the middle word. This is all based on the goyin. I'm not goyrus like the goyin because I'm a gronik, but because everybody's goyrus like the gra. And like I said already, the art scroll, the Mesifta, who are Hasidim, these are Hasidim, they all go based on the gra, based on the Tikkun Chadatin, who's the Talmud of the gra. And I just found out yesterday that the tests in Eretz Yisrael or across the world, the Dirshu tests, are based on the Tikkun Chadatin. So that's the Ungenumena Girsa. But there's a lot of, sometimes when it's too difficult, I kind of try to avoid it, because sometimes he'll take out from here, put back over there. Then if he takes out, then I'm very happy. We skip 3 lines and we go weiter. So over here he kind of takes it out. Ma'at David Lo, he doesn't go roya. So that's the famous halacha. If you have an extra chatos, you let it graze until it befalls a mum. It's a mum, you sell it. And then you have to be goyers over here. For this, I do have to jump down to the goyin over here on the side, and he sticks in these words. Oisa shniya roya, that we said. Hachamai at ovidlei. So he says, Kiman doma elul dava. According to the girsa that you say that it's an adava, hachanam adava. So if a person, the 2 Rebbe Lazars, right? We have 2 Talmidim that say in Rebbe Lazar 2 opposite things. So according to the Talmud, Rabbi Yosef says that if you grab extra money, the extra becomes an adava, becomes kadosh. So here it's kadosh. This extra chatos is kadosh. And according to the Manda Omar, that says that my Rebbe Lazar did not say it's kadosh. The opposite. It becomes chulin. So this also becomes chulin. Rabbi Yehuda Omer says the Gemara just explains a little more. Dar koinois dinarin. The Mishnah says that the first shekel is the darkoi. Dinar, v'chazru lishko is slime. What's a sela? Kishmuan. That's what we have today. Machsa shekel is half of a sela. Chazru lishko tvaim. And later on, they changed the currency, so went to a teva. Palgi slime. Each teva is a machsa shekel. It's a half a sela. So they would give the whole entire teva. They wouldn't do a half. In that point in time, they would give the entire teva. Bikshu lishko dinarim. But now they became Oiber Chacham. They became greedy. They said, why should I give a full coin? Let me just give the half of a coin. All through history, we give a half of a sela, a half of a shekel. Let me give a half of a teva. Well, guess what? Half a teva is worthless. It doesn't have value. So they didn't agree. So, Big Shulishkol dinarim kratim, v'loy kiblu aleim, they didn't accept it. Minadah, so from here we learn a major thing. Shalom Aleichem, Dr. Alan Rabinowitz. Haven't seen him in a while. How's it going over there in Montreal? Shalom. So what do we see from here? Listen to this. It says in the pasuk, and we're going to learn many halachas from this interesting word. It says in the pasuk Vehemadnu aleinu. This is a pasuk in Nehemiah. Vehemadnu aleinu mitzvahs laseis shlishis. Now, what the pasuk should say is shlish. Shlish is a third. Samuel Shalom Aleichem. Love the name. A shlish, but the Torah doesn't say shlish. The Torah says shlishis. So I'm going to learn here a ton of halachas. The what? Hashekel b'shana la'avodas beis Elokeinu. That's the pasuk. Reb Chilki b'shem Rebacha mekan shetzorach adam l'shal shikloi shloisha pamim b'shana. Some tremendous machmirim, they take this pasuk literally, and they say you have to. Well, the pasuk is saying you must give at least 3 times tzedakah per year. 3 tzedakahs a year, each time a shekel. So there are people, I know a guy like that in my shul, all he does is he gives total. The guy is a billionaire, I'm not kidding. He gives 3 shekel a year. That's it. You can't get a dime out of the guy. I hope he doesn't watch this year. Maybe I want to be melamed zchus. Maybe he took this pasuk literally. You're supposed to give tzedakah 3 times a year, a shekel. I can't be over on the pasuk. The pasuk says a shekel. Okay. But the pasuk is saying minimally. What is the minimum? 1 shekel 3 times a year. After he's nifter, they're going to say, wow, he used to give millions of tzedakah to B'ilam Shem. Nobody knew about it. I never saw. So, halacha number 1 is, we don't, how do you say magbid in English? You don't do those, get up on the bima or a boisai, no, fundraiser, not fundraiser, there's a word. Okay, you know what I'm talking about. Where the guy goes, I hate when they do it in America. They go with each guy, Dr. Rabinowitz, $5,000. And then the next guy has to keep up with the Joneses, and he feels stupid to say $180. So he says 5,000, but then he forgets to give it. The whole thing, that pressure. But anyway, you don't do it more than 3 times a year. I think 1 time is enough, but the Gemara says up to 3 times. And now we're going to learn a bunch of halachas. First of all, it says shlishis instead of shlish. So I learned the idea of each kli that you fill up of the machzah shekel could contain 3 sa, a nice amount. Mikan l'sholish kupas. How many of these containers do we have? 3. Mikan l'sholish afrashos. You were wondering, where do we get this idea of doing this 3 times a year? 3 kupas, and each kupa has 3 of a total of 27 sayin. It's from the pasuk shlishis. We take it literally. 3, 3, 3. Says the Gemara Ksiv, Ze yitnu kaloi v'alai pekudim. Rabbi Yehuda, right? So, I think I have the pasuk here. Yeah. Ze yitnu kaloi v'alai pekudim. When you do the census, whoever goes through the census, machzah shekel, you should give a half a shekel. B'shekel hakodesh. How much is that worth? Esrim geira. 20 geira. So, Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Nechemiah Chad Omer Lefi Shechatu b'machzas hayoim yitnu machzas shekel. Klai Yisrael sinned halfway through the day with the egel. So, because of that, HaKadosh Baruch said, give a half a shekel. Where's the half? Maybe they should give a full. No, it has to do with when they sinned on the egel. V'chad Omar, another pshat. Lefi Shechatu b'sheishois bayoim. It was 6 hours into the day. Yitnu machzas shekel david shito garmisen. Because it's worth 6 garmisen. So 6 hours. One says it was half of the day, so it's half a shekel. The other one says 6 hours equals 6 garmisen. Because they broke the 10 commandments, the Aseres HaDibros. Why Aseres HaDibros? Because when you do have the Zara, that's the worst of the worst. That's what we had the other day also. That's considered a mummer. Someone that does have a Zara, it's as if he broke the entire Torah. He was over on the Aseres HaDibros. So therefore, asara geira. Each person should give asara geira. So we said in the pasuk esrim geira hashekel. So how much is half of esrim? 10. Even in Panovich we know that half of 20 is 10. So memela, that's why we give asara geira per person, which is a max hashekel. Reb Rechia says. Reb Levi says, B'Shem Reb Shimon ben Lakish, V'Vishemachru b'chayr shel Rachel. They sold the bechar of Rachel, who is Yosef. The Shvatim sold Yosef. How much did they sell him for? be'esrim kesef. They sold him for 20. Here's the pasuk. Vayimkeru es Yosef leishmeilim be'esrim kesef. So they sold him for 20. Yehei kol echad ve'echad poides benoi b'choyroi be'esrim kesef. So therefore, 20 dinar equals a machsa shekel. It's to come to be mechaper on the avera of the shvatim selling Yosef. Repinchas, I understand now. I'm thinking to myself out loud. Like I come from Shevet Yehuda. Others come from Shevet Levi. I can understand that. But what if you come from Shevet Yosef? I guess nobody does. Why do I have to pay for the sin of the other shvatim that they did to my forefather? Lefisha macher b'chayra shel Rachel be'esrim kesef. Says the Gemara, Repinchas b'shem Reb Levi, another pshat. Similar but not the same. Lefisha machru b'chayra shel Rachel be'esrim kesef. They sold Yosef how much? 20. V'nafal lekol echad ve'echad mehem tiva. You hear this? How much? When they sold Yosef, they got 20. They made 20. So what did they do with the 20? They divided it up. They divided it between 10 brothers. So 10 brothers, each one got 2. Each one got a tiva. So it makes a lot of sense. Since each one got a full tiva, so we have to give a tiva today, which equals a machzah shekel. Now let me ask you a question. How many shvatim were there? There are 12. So how do you go from 12 shvatim to 10? It says over here, the Gemara says 10 of them sold. So there's 2 pshatim here on the side. Either Yosef doesn't count, obviously, because he was sold, so that's 11, and Binyamin wasn't there. So you have 10. Another interesting pshat from the Tikkun Chatan is that Binyamin and I think he says, Reuven and Binyamin weren't there. No. So now you're down to 9. So the Tikkun Chatan, no. Yosef counts. And that answers the question I asked before, without thinking about it. Now I'm chapping and answers the question before. Yosef is guilty. Because every fight like that, you have 2 parties. And the other party is guilty. Yosef is guilty because he caused his brother to be jealous. So he has to pay. Obviously he didn't divvy up the money with them. But it's as if he got a chelik of that money. And therefore, those are the 10 shvatim. Reuven and Binyamin don't count. But you have to count Yosef. As a side note, why not? The Vilna Gaon says over here, Mishnah Zilyo, the bottom piece, he says like this, that in the Mishnah you see a very nice piece. I hope I say it over correctly. There's 3 things going on in the Mishnah. There's the Arkoinos, and there's a Sela, and there's Tiva. So he says, what's going on? It fits into what we just said here. That the half of the Darkoin, why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu have a Darkoin? Because it fits in with the half a day. Klal Yisrael sinned with the Egel halfway through the day. Then he says, you give a half a Sela, which equals 6 Garmisim. That goes according to the second pshat of the Gemara. That's in the 6th hour of the day. This is the Vilna Gaon he's a genius, and he made it fit in beautifully. Half a Darkoin equals half a day. That's the first teretz of the Gemara. The 6th hour teretz of the Gemara fits in with 6 Garmisim of the Mishnah. And when the Mishnah says a whole teva, which equals 10 gera, that correlates to the Aseres Hadibros that the Gemara talks about that Klal Yisrael broke because they did avodas zara egel, and it correlates to the tiva that each shevet received for selling Yosef. And now we turn to the Vav Amud Beis. Interesting, because yesterday we had a new sponsor for the turning of the page, but that was on Daf Ches. But we're still holding that Vav today. Sponsored by Eli Dykman, Brocha vehatzlacha for all the MDY team in their everyday lives, for all the hard avodas hakodesh they do. Yishkoyach Eli, his time is almost running up. I think he has one more day, or maybe today's his last day. We shall see. Maybe, one more. Sponsor for the Refuah Shlema for Chayli Yisrael, especially from our MDY family. Please consider joining the MDY Tehillim group, tehillim.8mindaf.com. Says the Heilige Mishnah, Halacha Dalid, the official Halacha Mishnah in Yerushalmi, sponsored by Official from Official Catering. Says the Mishnah, Moisar Shkalim Chulin. So you have left over from the shekel, becomes chulin as we discussed. Moisar Asir Seifa. If a person is bringing a mincha consists of flour, and he has extra flour. The Gemara is going to discuss exactly which mincha. What happens to the leftover? Moisar Kinei Zavim, a person who has an emission of ziva, and he has to bring karbanos. He's a full zav, or kinei zavais, the birds that a zava brings. V'kinei yaldais, the birds that a yeledes, a woman who gives birth. Chatois v'ashamois, you bring a chatos and a asham, you have leftover. Moisarim nedava, all the leftover, even from a mincha, chatos, kinim, all that is a nedava. In other words, what's the nedava again? Goes to Ketz HaMizbeach. When there's a lull in the Mizbeach, there's a low time, you bring a oila. Zaklal. Says the Mishnah, there's a rule. If whatever you're bringing is for forgiveness, whatever is left over, you bring as a nedava. Unbelievable. Over 20 people live on an Erev Yontif with a 20-minute heads up. This time I'm serious. I'm taking it personally. This is a chizuk. Every day is a chizuk for me. When there's a lot of people, 100 plus people, and it's YouTube. But today, it's one of these days. Imagine I would be talking to myself, which I might be doing for the second cheer, because you guys are going to be ready with your kittel and everything, and I'm going to be filming, running down the highway, on the side of the highway, but it's going to happen, and nobody's going to be there, so you should for being there now. Jeff Gordon, Shalom Aleichem. I missed you. You know when the last time I saw you was? Maybe last Pesach. No, but seriously, I see you all the time because you're on that clip that's on Yeshiva World News, or 7,000 people watch that thing. Hi, Jeff Gordon. And ever since my son told me about it, I never put it down. Yeah? You still with us every day? Every day. Beautiful Jeff Gordon from Florida. What did you say? I didn't hear. On YouTube. Okay, Givaldik. It's great to see you. Simcha G'dayla. Okay. Says the Mishnah, Moisar Oila, Le Oila. So we have to remember over here, if a person brings the Oila and he has extra money from the Oila, he set aside money. He said, you know what, I'm putting $1,000 away for an animal. I heard they're very expensive. He got a great deal. It cost him $900. What does he do with the extra 100? Sets it aside for oila, but a private oila for himself. Moisar mincha lemincha. Leftover for the mincha goes to a mincha. Moisar shlamim shlamim. He set aside money for shlamim, goes to shlamim, anything left over. Moisar pesach. I forgot to mention this. The hashgacha pratis. I'm telling you, because Rabbi Wallerstein said this in his beautiful speech at the Siyum in New York, that the hashgacha pratis, it's a once in a million that we're going to finish Mesechtes Psachim just a few days before Pesach. But what is the chance that yesterday Daf Ches is all about Leil HaSeder, and that Daf Vav is all about the Korban Pesach, which we got to bring tomorrow. Korban Pesach. Be'ez Hashem, Mashiach is coming now, and we're going to bring it tomorrow. So we're going to have a ton of stuff about Korban Pesach now. Moisar Pesach, the chance in terms of, you can win the lottery. This is 1 out of 1 billion. Moisar Pesach leShlamim, Moisar Nazirim leNazirim. Yeah, the Shas has 2,711 daf. How many daf in Shas talk about a Korban Pesach? I don't know, not very many. Let's call it 10, 20. That one of the dafim falls out on Erev Pesach. Besides the whole Masechta that we just finished. Moisar Pesach leShlamim, you have leftover Korban Pesach. In other words, money set aside for Korban Pesach. What do you do with it? That we learned in Pesachim. A Korban Pesach, when you don't make it a Korban Pesach, is automatically a shlamim. It is be'etzem a shlamim, that's what it is. But when you sort of a shlamim, a kind of a shlamim, but when you bring it on Erev Pesach, it's a carbon Pesach. But it's not a shlamim. Don't confuse. You have to say, and we're going to see in the sugya. Moisar Nazirim leNazir. A Nazir, somebody who grows out his hair, he refrains from drinking wine, he's a Nazir Lashem. When the whole serious process, we're not going to go into it, but he has to bring 3 korbanos on his final day. He has to bring a chatos, oil, and a shlamim. So, one of them is extra, he has extra money, he should bring it for a carbon, the Gemara is going to discuss. And that's if the Beis Hamikdash, they set money aside for poor people that are Nazirim. A poor Nazir. Moisar Nazir, this is talking about a guy that could afford it, but he has some extra money set aside for his Naziros, Linadava. So that goes to the other ones, the communal Naziros goes to Nazirim. Why not? They're just collecting money for Nazirim anyways, put it in the pushka for Nazirim. But this one is a private Naziros, so that goes for Keitz HaMizbeach, for the dessert of the Mizbeach. Omar Rabbi Yossi. Adan otam on Shamis, before I came to Eretz Yisrael, in other words, when I was in Bavel, very interesting lashon. Shamis kol, I heard the voice, Rabbi Yehuda Sho'il l'Shmuel. Now we know, we have this throughout Bavli. Who was the famous Talmud of Rav and Shmuel? Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda throughout Shas, I don't know how many hundreds of times, it says, Omar Rabbi Yehuda, Omar Shmuel. Omar Rabbi Yehuda, Omar Rav. So Rabbi Yehuda constantly quoted. So here you have a situation where Rabbi Yossi says, I was present when Rabbi Yehuda asked his Rebbe Shmuel. Hirsch shikloi v'meis, an unfortunate situation. A person was nifter after he designated his machzah shekel and before he's able to give it to the Beis Hamikdash. Says Shmuel Amar Lei Yiplu Nadava. What you do with the money, obviously it can't be a machzah shekel because he's dead. So what do you do with it? So you give it to that pushka called Nidava. There's a bunch of these pushka things. There's 6 of them maybe in the Beidosh that said Nidava on it. Big words, Nidava. And you put money in there. And the money goes to buy oilos, random animals that the Mizbeach should never be without a carbon on it. Moisar Asiris Ho'ifa Sheloi. So, here's a pasuk. Ubiyoim by el hakodesh el hachatzar primus. We're talking about a kohen gadol, and he has to bring every day. The kohen gadol brings from his own personal pocket. He brings a mincha. It's called a minchas chavitim, and the Torah considers it very interesting. Chatasai, a chatos, but it's his own personal money. What happens when there's extra money set aside? He designated, he said, okay, I'm going to buy some flour, make a chavitin, and he put a little bit too much on the side, and he has extra money. It's his own personal money. Rebbe says, too bad. There's nothing to do with that money. He cannot purchase another carbon with it, and he can't use it, so you have to destroy the money. Rebbe Lazar Amar Yiblun Dava says, Rebbe Lazar, did you not notice that the pasuk says chatasai? So if I have extra money, as the Mishnah said already, if I have extra money from a chatos, what happens to the money? It goes to Nadava. So here also, the kohen gadol's minchas chavitim is a chatos. So it should go to Nadava. It should go for other oilos on the mizbeach. Says the Gemara, Masnisa Pliga Rabbi Yochanan. However, the Brisa argues on Rabbi Yochanan. If you hear my stomach, that's because I need to eat. Masnisa Pliga Rabbi Yochanan. We'll eat, you know when? On Shabbos, when we sleep. Right before we go to sleep, we're going to eat. Right now, there's no time. It's in sight. Why? We have a problem with Rabbi Yochanan. Yomi Shekalim, and it says, it says specifically, what do I do with the leftover of Asira Saifa? It says, it says specifically, it goes to Nidava. So why are you telling me, Rabbi Yochanan, that you have to throw it out into Yam HaMelach? It says Mefurish. Let's read again. Moisar Asiris Haifa. The leftover of the chatas becomes a Nidava. And Rabbi Yochanan says you have to throw it away. My Avala Rabbi Yochanan, what's Rabbi Yochanan going to do with this? Pasala, our Mishnah, Moisar Asirus Laifa Sheminchas Choite Shekol Yisrael. There's something else going on here. When there's a carbon Oila v'yared means that it's on a scale. Depends how wealthy you are. You have to bring a carbon. You start, if you're wealthy enough, bring a sheep. Oh, but a sheep costs $500-600. You can't afford that? Bring a bird. You can't even afford a bird. Then you bring this guy right over here. This minchas chayta. So, that's the difference. We're not talking about the mincha of a kohen gadol. We're talking about a different mincha. Minchas chayta. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yosi Omar, Alda Olil Abba Barba. Wow. It's a name that we've never heard of, but it is somebody that we heard of, because the Tikkun Chatan says we're talking about the father of Shmuel. It's Abba Bar Abba, so the Yerushalmi calls him Abba Barba. So, he had Olil means he had a problem with. Amrin, Minayin Cha Pesach. Again, we're talking about Korban Pesach. Unbelievable. Minayin Cha Pesach Mishtana L'Shem Shlomim. That you could take a Korban Pesach and flip it into a Shlomim. How do you know this? Think about it. The word Zevach is completely extra here. It should say, V'min hatzoin karbonoi shlomim. If from your sheep, from your flock, you have a carbon shlomim, great. What's lezevach? Kol shu min hatzoin ba shlomim. So anything that's from the flock, from the sheep, it becomes shlomim. So if I have a carbon pesach, which is from the sheep, how do you make a carbon pesach? From sheep and goats, from the smaller animals, it can become, I can flip it into shlomim. Says the Gemara, I have a lot of issues with this. Hey Sivon, I have a problem. Question number one, what? If I have a carbon oila set aside, I can bring oila that's a sheep, that's a goat? No, sheep. I can bring a oila minatzayin. So what, I can flip it into a shlamim? No way. That's not true, says the Gemara. You know why? Because the oila, I can bring it out of cows, bulls. Not cows, bulls. So Memela, it has something else. So it's not in this. I'm talking about something that could only be brought from the flock, such as a carbon pesach. Carbon pesach, I can flip into shlamim, but an oila, since it could be cows, you can't flip it into shlamim. Hey, see, I have another question then. Hari asham, which is only a asham, carbon asham, 5-6 times you bring a asham, right? Asham gzelis, asham ilis, asham shiv charufa. It could only be from sheep. So what are you going to do? Well, you're going to tell me that if a person designates a asham, they can flip it into a shlamim? From all of the flock, meaning from goats and sheep. A carbon pesach can be a goat. Remember, we had an MDY, we had a goat, a small one. It's in the Agada, I noticed. By the way, check out that Agada. It's only 64 pages long, but it's geschmack. A lot of nice articles there. Yudah Shuk Shalom Aleichem. It was great to see you at the Siyum. So, you have something that could be a sheep and a goat, that's only carbon pesach. Asham can only be from sheep. That's the Asham Shenabala Mina Elim Bilvad. Says the Gemara, B'chol Atarat Omar Min Lemay. But I have another problem. All through the Torah, minat bakar, minat tzayin karbanai, always is a miod, it comes to exclude something. And now you're telling me that the word min comes to include something. To say that it's not only sheep, but it's also goats, and that's why Asham is not included, but I just added something because of the word min. It's not true. Over here, I use the word min to exclude. Yes, you're right, it comes to include, but it also comes to exclude. Miod shein ba ben shtei shanim, that a carbon pesach cannot be 2 years old, it can only be in the first year. Miut sheini bamin nekeva, carbon pesach cannot be female, only a male. V'gavi asham nami min lamaytu, and you should know that by asham also the word min comes as a miut. Sheini ba'alam min ha'elim bilavad, it only comes from the male sheep. Hey Sivon, I have a question. V'aksiv v'im min atzayin karbanoi min akvasim oy min izim la'ayla. So now, since it says this pasuk, whatever pasuk you have by Carbon Pesach, you have by Oila, the same words. So perhaps if I have a Carbon Pesach that I didn't use, so maybe instead of flipping it into a shlamim, flip it into Oila. Who told you to flip it into? Why are you flipping it into a shlamim? Says Gemara, very simple answers that we have throughout Shas. It has to be similar to you have an option. You have a carbon Pesach that you didn't use. You know why? Because your friend said, come join my Chabura, I have a much better animal. You joined him. Now, you're stuck with this. What do you do? So, it turns into a shlamim, but maybe turn into oila. But it makes more sense to be a shlamim because it's very similar to shlamim. It's not similar to oila at all. Why? A carbon Pesach you could eat, a shlamim you can eat. You could eat. A carbon oila you can't eat. Don't flip it into oila. I go from a carbon Pesach, which is kachim kalam, the lower level of gedusha, to a shlamim, which is the lower level of gedusha of kachim kalam. You don't want to take a shlamim, which is a kachim kalam, and knock it up a madrega to a naila, which is kachim kachim. Rabbi Chanina had a problem with this. Dinu Namrin, the Chachamim in Bavel said, so here we go into the nitty gritty. We had sugis similar to this in Pesachim. I have a carbon Pesach. Again, the amazing coincidence, the Ashgacha brought is that the day before carbon Pesach, we're talking about carbon Pesach. We're not talking about, yesterday we're talking about the Seder, the Al-Kaisis, we're talking about the Hiraisa of bringing a carbon Pesach. So, I have a carbon Pesach, and I want to flip it into a shlamim. Does it flip by itself? Let's say I designated my carbon Pesach Chanukah time. I see a gorgeous animal. I said, I'm going to bring this to the Rebbeinu Shalom on Pesach. But comes Chanukah, I have a lot of guests. I want to use it for my lamb chops. I want to make it a shlamim. Now, obviously, if I'm going to shecht it on Chanukah, it's not a Pesach because it's not Erev Pesach. I can't bring a carbon Pesach on Chanukah. So do I need to say something specifically? Do I need to say, hey, this is a carbon shlamim, and then it switches, it flips into shlamim? Why do I have to say anything? It's obvious that what I'm doing right now is turning a carbon Pesach into carbon shlamim. Chachamim say no. You have to say specifically. You have to designate it as a carbon shlamim, then it flips. Vani Omer, and Chanina says, and Rabbi Yochanan is quoting him, Afilu shchate l'shem oila. Even if a person takes a carbon Pesach and says, this carbon Pesach is a oila, which it can never be, it flips automatically into shlamim because there's no other choice. The fact that you called it a oila, so you could call it a rocket ship if you want, it's not going to help. It cannot be a oila. So you just shechted something that cannot be an oila. So meila, it turns into a shlamim on its own. Amar Rabila. Time of the Rabbi Yochanan. And the reason is, so again, the word zevach, completely extra. So Mamela, I learned from it, kol shu zevach ba shlamim. Anything that, anything that is brought as a carbon flips into a shlamim. So if I say that this carbon is an oila, it flips into a shlamim. Now, the Gemara says, umishtana lemachshavas psul hechavida. So could I flip it in? Could I make this machshava possible? In other words, when I shecht an animal, and that's throughout zvachim and achas, we had it many times even in Pesachim. When a kohen shechts an animal, he can ruin the animal by having the wrong thought. What's the wrong thought? The trick is to think that I'm going to eat the animal outside of its allotted time. So if an animal, you could eat a shlamim typically for 2 days and a night. A carbon Pesach, for instance, you could only eat the night, till alois, till chatzais, whatever we say. So if the kohen thinks I'm going to eat this carbon for 4 days, pigo, and then if someone goes ahead and eats it, even within the allotted time, it's chayiv kares. So says the Gemara, what if I thought a machshav is psul? So the Gemara says, whoa, first of all, hey chavida, what's the case? So he has a carbon Pesach, and he thinks to himself, oh, I'm going to bring this as a oila, and a oila. I have to do zrikas adam right away. I'm going to sprinkle the blood tomorrow. Says the Gemara, why do you have to dray a cup and say, I made it a oila? Mikol magam basalu. this would be a psul even if you didn't make it a ayla, even if you left it as is. If you're going to take the blood of a shlamim, of a carbon pesach, and throw it tomorrow, that was your machshava, you ruined it. Now, here's a big yisoid, and we said this a number of times, but this is a yisoid in Kachim. In order for this machshava of pigul to work, it's very similar to a mitzvah. Just like a mitzvah, you have to have a pure intent. You can't mix up the intent with other intents. So too, the machshava of pigul has to be pure. Has to be a perfect aveira. You can't have any other intent in there. So the Gemara says, in teimar mishtana l'machsheves psul pigul, in teimar mishtana l'machsheves psul pigul. So, if I thought that it's a ayla, the Gemara wants to say that maybe that ruined it. By me taking a carbon pesach and thinking to myself that it's a ayla, so that was a no number one. And then on top of that, I want to add no number two and say that it's pigul, it's not going to grab. It's not going to be chal. Because in order for me to make an aveira of pigul, I have to have a pure animal. I'll take an ayla that started out as an ayla and think that I'm going to pour the blood. Instead of today, I'm going to pour it tomorrow. But if I already messed it up, so to speak, by saying that my carbon pesach is a ayla, it's so messed up that I can't add on another mess up. Or perhaps yes. Okay. Says the Gemara, Lishmoi v'shaloi lishmoi b'shari yemais hashana. So it's a very interesting halacha when it comes to carbon pesach. Again, we're talking about a carbon pesach. The first Mishnah of Masechtas Zvachim tells us a very interesting halacha. We know all karbanos, if you have the wrong intent. Let's say I bring a carbon shlamim and I think to myself that it's a carbon chatas, whatever. I didn't ruin it. I continue doing whatever I need to do. I wasn't yortzeit my shlamim, but I continue bringing it. There's two exceptions to the rule: carbon pesach and carbon chatas. If I think to myself that this carbon pesach is a chatos, this carbon pesach is a oila, this carbon pesach is shlamim, I destroy the carbon pesach. Take the carbon pesach, toss it in the trash. Nothing. I can't do anything with it. But this is counterintuitive, because if I have a carbon pesach on Chanukah, then the only way I can make that carbon pesach kosher is if I think to myself that it's not a carbon pesach. If I think to myself that a carbon pesach is a good carbon pesach on Chanukah, I ruined it, because it's not Pesach. It's not Erev Pesach. So the only way to make a carbon pesach kosher on Chanukah is to think that it's not a carbon pesach. So says the Gemara, based on that, L'shmoi v'shaloi l'shmoi b'shai yemais hashana. What if a person thought to himself that on Chanukah, Harei ani mishugana, I'm going to bring a carbon pesach on Chanukah. So what did he do? He just ruined it. But a second later he said, I don't want it to be a carbon pesach. Oops, I made a mistake. I want it to be a shlamim. Rabbi Bun bar Chiya b'shem Shmuel bar Abba says, Mikiven she'in l'shem nasi k'shechat l'shmoi u'shaloi l'shmoi b'shtika v'u kosher. Ooh, hard words. But what he's saying is that on a regular Tuesday afternoon, on a Chanukah day, if I was quiet, I brought my carbon pesach and I didn't say anything, nothing. Again, I designated my carbon pesach on the first day of Chanukah. The last day of Chanukah, my entire family shows up and I need some extra lamb chops. So I take my carbon pesach and I don't say a word. I don't say, oh, this is a shlamim. I don't say anything. Take my carbon pesach, it says on it in black paint, carbon pesach. I take it, I bring it onto the mizbeach. What's the halacha? The halacha is, it's no good. I didn't save it. I didn't change it into a carbon shlamim. So what do I have to do? I have to specifically say, this is a carbon shlamim. In other words, says the Gemara, that if I have a real carbon pesach, I could change the designation with my mouth. Says the Gemara, if so what if a person said, this is a carbon pesach? He says specifically this is a carbon pesach. So he could change it by saying something else. Just like if he doesn't say anything, it has a halacha as if this is a carbon pesach, yet he could still regret it and say it's a carbon shlamim. So what's the difference? If a person says specifically, this is a Korban Pesach, and 10 seconds later he says, this is a Korban Shlamim, it should be the same exact halacha that he flipped it into Korban Shlamim. Be kosher. Amar leim keinu. If that's the case, he says, so what about if he does the avodah, there's 4 avodas, shchita, kabbalah, hilacha, and zrika. So the first avodah is he shechted the animal, and that was designated for a Korban Pesach. Lishma, I did the right thing. But Korban Pesach and Chanukah doesn't work. So he waited until he did kabbalah, then he did zrika, then he did hilacha, then he did zrika. And by the zrika, he decided, wakes up, he says, oh, I want it as a shlamim. It should be equal as if he did both. That he shechted it lishma and he shechted it shlo lishma. And you skip the word b'shtika. Via kasher. L'chayra, it should be kasher. Says Gemara, no. Mari, moneimar b'shtika kasher, and never b'shtika apostle. It's not true. Maybe by doing the shechita without saying anything and waiting until the final avodah, maybe you ruined it. It's Chanukah today. You can't shecht a Korban Pesach on Chanukah, and if you didn't change the designation, you just left it as is. Maybe in fact you ruined it. Who told you didn't ruin it? You're assuming that you didn't ruin it, and by waiting until the final avodah, you save it. It's too late to save on the final avodah. Once you ruined it in the beginning, says the Gemara, perhaps you ruined it. Have a wonderful day. If I don't see you, and the next year, have a hakodesh v'sameach. And if you're in Eretz Yisrael watching this after Pesach, have a good moed. Don't forget. No Sfiras Hayomer today. You guys in Israel, we already discussed yesterday the Sfiras Hayomer. Be'ezer Hashem, if possible, I'm going to learn Daf Zayin now. Literally did not see one word on this daf. Nice and long, Yishmak. Be'ezer Hashem, before Shabbos, I should have this up and running. If anybody wants to join, it'll be a tremendous schos. Yishkoyach Rabbi Isai. Have a wonderful day. Shkoyach Rabbi Isai. Mamash HaKiddush Hashem. Could somebody fill in for Yeshua maybe?
Mr. Stefansky.
Hold on, let me turn this around for a second. You guys could stay on. We'll pretend there's a lot of guys here. Who's that? Jeff, what's going on? Tell me what's going on in your life. Erev Pesach. How do you know that we're on now? You got a notification on YouTube. Wow. Amazing. It's great to see you. It was a lot of chizuk. You should know, a video like that, you don't realize what kind of effect, how many people it affected. What you said over there is beautiful, and you have a lot of schusim. Everybody in their own time, in their own place. But it's amazing that, how long are you with this year already? Wow. All the way from Brochas. Gewaldig, gewaldig. Stephen Sokol, Shalom Aleichem.